Welcome back to Actually Useful, the podcast where we diagnose what's wrong with the internet and chat with the great folks who are trying to fix it. What's up, Ariel? What's up, Raj? How are you guys doing?
What's up? How are you?
Hey, how's it going?
Doing good. Very heavy news week here with all the
Yeah.
stuff going on with Kimmel. What's your take on everything?
Yeah, so we're 2 days out from Kimmel being fired because FCC Chair Brendan Carr went on a podcast and said that anybody who said mean things about Charlie Kirk would be fired. One of the things that's interesting as I was looking into the context of this is that people pointed out that there were two main ABC affiliate broadcasting groups that pushed for this, Nexstar and Sinclair. Now, Sinclair was the second one. They followed Nexstar's lead within a couple hours. Sinclair is famously a conservative broadcasting group. They have their newscasters do these must read right-wing talking points. So it's not super surprising that they complied. However, Nexstar, who kicked it off, they own 32 different ABC affiliates. They pulled Kimmel because they are trying to create a merger with this broadcasting group. I think it's called Tegna. Basically, there is an FCC rule that says that no broadcasting company can reach more than 39% of the country. That's an antitrust rule that's on the books in the FCC. Well, Nexstar would like the FCC to override that rule for them so that they can merge with Tegna and reach 80% of American households. And so the obvious speculation is that Nexstar complied with FCC Brendan Carr's crazy conservative talking point because they want Brendan Carr and Trump to bless this merger. And then on top of that, I feel a little bit gleeful watching this. I said in episode 1 of Actually Useful that Hulu is what radicalized me. I think Hulu is one of the worst products that exists out there. Great catalog, terrible product. Their UX obviously is very hostile to lesser accounts. So people who have the subscription that has ads to people who are viewing from a laptop. And on top of this, my friend pointed out to me this past weekend, she showed me this article in the New York Times that I encourage all of you to read. It's not really about tech, but it is about enshittification. It's called Disney and the Decline of America's Middle Class. It's a recent New York Times article. And it basically talks about how Disney's old motto was that everyone is a VIP. But since the pandemic in particular, it's actually become just a haven for super rich families. So they used to have free fast passes where you could skip the line of rides that you really wanted to ride. But now they have so many different paid line skipping products. There's no free line skipping products. I mean, in the last 3 years, they've made $724 million from line skipping products alone. And anyway, this article was really interesting. It compared the experience of a 5-person middle class family on an $80,000 a year household income. They spent $2,500 to do a multi-day Disney experience. And they had a good time, but it was it sounded terrible. It was they were going during the hottest time of the year. They were stressed. They were rushing. They had to wait in really long lines. They didn't have time to do all the things that they wanted to do. And then that story is contrasted with the experience of this tech executive who brings his young daughter. They paid $8,000 for their Disney tickets and line skipping options, and they didn't have to wait in line. They got to go during the best time of year over the holidays when it's cool and it's busy. They got to wake up late. They got to do more. And so it just was a really interesting article about how Disney is actually one of the worst perpetrators of enshittification out there today. So I'm not super mad that they're getting their moment of cancellation. There's been a lot of people on socials talking about canceling, and then really cool upside, people are talking about if you have young kids who are obsessed with Bluey, which is an amazing show and everybody should watch it. The public library has DVDs of Bluey, so you can cancel your Disney account and go to the public library and still get that lovely dog in your household. So yeah, that's been my take on the Kimmel situation, other than the obvious, oh God, what timeline are we living in? Fear. But that's the enshittification take.
That's a really interesting point about Disney, because when I was researching this, I always thought that the Fast Pass lane was something that was paid for, but I didn't realize it was free. And it essentially just rewarded people who were loyal to Disney and, willing to wait. But it was very egalitarian. It was if you really are committed to this, you're going to have a better experience. And now the people who can pay more are going to have the better experience, and it's bad for everyone else, basically. So they force you to pay, which is classic tech paradigm.
Yeah, classic. I mean, it's almost like the people who are willing to pay more, it's not even that they're getting a better experience. They're getting the original experience. Like they're getting the base experience that everybody was getting in the 90s. But now you have to pay thousands and thousands of dollars to experience it. And there's this sort of like lower class Disney citizen who basically is going to have like a really tough time at the park. And it just makes me sad. Makes me sad for families that have saved up all this time for their trip to Disney and then have to like wait in line for hours. I mean, the difference here is like really stark. We're talking about like the tech executive in the story waited for 5 minutes for a line that everybody else was waiting for like 85 minutes. And I think their natural line, like the like you didn't pay for anything line, is called standby, which is like kind of insane because it's like, well, no, that's not standby. That's the line. That's the main line.
Raj, have you been to Disney? Are you a Disney fan? What are your thoughts?
You know, my wife actually used to work at Disney.
Okay.
So the secret is if you work at Disney, particularly Disney corporate, so they have different tiers of discounts. If you work at Disney corporate, it's almost between 35 and sometimes even 55% off. And so during that 4-year period, my son, who was 2 at the start and 6 at the end, would sometimes say, "Do we have to go to Disneyland again?" So we went, because we went so much. I mean, we took Disneyland, Disney World, Disney Cruise. And now, since then, it's been really difficult to go back just because, going in the food line and seeing costs being 40% more, it's hard.
Yeah, totally. That's the way to do it, I guess. Well, Raj, tell us about yourself. Tell us a little bit about your background, what you're doing now. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, no, happy to be here. I hate to use, cliches, the tech bro, I guess, been a builder most of my career, started my first tech, in the file sharing era, the sort of Napster Nutella era, back in 2000, and never really looked back. And I've worked in a range of spaces, building in file sharing and music and college dating and recipes, and the list goes on. And currently I'm at Mozilla. They actually acquired my last company where I was doing meeting summarization, and I'm responsible for new products, and we're focused on small business. That's what I'm kind of focused on now, but I've been all over the tech space, almost everything entirely consumer.
What'd you do in the file sharing and music space? Just because I'm in that space at the moment, so I'm curious.
Well, 2000 was the wild, wild west, right? This was like if you think about that time period, I remember like the GNU public license GPL was just literally being drafted. Like open source was a whole new model. I don't know if you remember Microsoft was fighting open source. The music industry didn't know how to react to file sharing. Mm-hmm. They wanted people to buy CDs. They were coming after you. And I don't know if you remember, if you were downloading music through any of these systems, they would attempt to sue you for like billions. Yeah. You'd hear about lawsuits for like $80 million or $80 billion or whatever it might be,
right?
Yeah,
the classic Napster lawsuits. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so at the time, Napster, Nutella, Scour, there was a whole bunch of them, QMX, iMesh, and others. You would search for your song. But you would have to go run the search on each of these different networks to try to find that song. And so I actually built the first meta file sharing network that would search across all of them at the same time, which in today's world is like, yeah, whatever. But like back then, that was like a novel thing. And then the interesting thing is, I don't know if I'm formally credited, but I was one of the first users or use of the word to popularize the word leecher, because we were basically taking music but not giving back, right? So when you wrote these file sharing apps, they were designed in such a way that you would also share, not just take. So I remember writing about this during Open P2P and some of the early blogs in that era, Zero Hedge, etc. This is all like 99, 98 timeframe. But yeah, that's what I was doing back then.
Are you familiar with SoulSeek?
SoulSeek, I am not.
Because SoulSeek is what a lot of DJs use now. So I work at a music file storage platform, and I mean, you can't really pay to download the music, but we've effectively replaced iTunes for a lot of people, and it's used by all the major labels and what have you. But one of the applications that I've been looking into is basically how we could let DJs use the platform to replace SoulSeek, because it's basically still, DJs need the actual files for music. So they're doing that, but there's a whole culture around leeching, and if you're going to take music from SoulSeek, you also have to put it up onto SoulSeek.
I see. But is SoulSeek not a subscription? So you just kind of are just downloading whatever you want? No,
it's illegal.
Oh, I see.
I see.
I got it.
But it gets into your local files. But yeah, because people don't want to pay. You can still buy things on iTunes, but nobody wants to pay $1.99 per song.
That period was so fascinating. So I actually built Chuck D's website. at the time from Public Enemy. So his website was called Rap Station. I was like his web developer. He became the sort of spokesperson fighting against the Recording Industry Association of America, trying to defend sort of P2P and file sharing. And, the internet infrastructure wasn't at a place where you could stream music, right? So this was all kind of like, they were fighting it tooth and nail, like P2P shouldn't exist, whatever. So it was really interesting watching this sort of battle between the music industry and obviously where we are today. But now it's much more legit, mature, it's a different stage.
What was the name of your product?
File sharing company. It was called Terrazima. And it was a very, very random sort of name. And we had this really cool animation. And the funny thing, there was already like kind of a threat that we were going to get sued. Now you have to imagine you're college kids and like the music industry is just going to come out and say, I'm going to sue you for like $100 million if you start instrumenting these downloads. And at that time, the school networks, the security holes all over the place. Like funny, not funny looking back in 1998, I wrote a simple app and I ended up taking down the entire school's mail server, right? Because they didn't have this notion of like separated workspaces, like what they call now VPS, virtual private spaces. So people would host the files on the school server and then you would download through there.
So you've obviously seen the internet go through like so many changes in your tenure. I know when you and I first talked a couple weeks ago, the quote I have from you is, I used to think I knew what was good for the internet and what people wanted. And now I don't think I know that. And it's not my place to judge. I'm curious, like, tell me a little bit more about that experience of you once thinking that you knew sort of like what taste looked like and what people wanted and what makes a good product, and now you kind of being like, I'm gonna let the people decide.
That's exactly right. I've always built things for myself, like personal pain points. Like I see a problem, maybe that's my superpower. I see something and like it bothers me, like I need to fix it, and I would judge. I'm like, that's not a great idea. And then what I realized, and some of this was an investor that said something I thought that was quite insightful. They said, we never make the wrong investment. We just make it at the wrong time. Very, very sort of arrogant statement at some level. But if you think about it, what they're really saying, there's no such thing as a bad idea. It's just market timing. If you get the timing right, you'll figure that out. And timing sometimes requires a little bit of luck. But I remember in 2012 or 2013, this app emerged. And I thought it was the dumbest idea ever. And it was called the Yo app. And you would install this app, and you just hit a button and it would just blast yo to all your friends. And it sounds like something we probably need today, just to create some more authentic communication. But at the time it was just like, this is insane. And then there you go. It raises $8 million. Now, of course, at that time, the perception or sort of the industry perspective was like raising money was like kind of this milestone. Oh, you raise money, like, oh, you're more legit. You're like at a new phase. Like the funny thing is now we're in the counter culture, sort of like if you don't raise money, it's like more credibility. It's kind of the opposite. So I think that's all very interesting. But in any case, I remember this app came and it took off. And then at that point I realized like I can't judge what's going to work or not. I certainly have a sense of product taste. I certainly build things that I feel like demonstrate or emote what I think is a great experience. But like, I can't, can I tell you that's a bad idea? No. But can I give you feedback? Sure. But ultimately, you'll see experiences. I mean, there was this website I recently saw, which has got to be the ugliest UX you could possibly imagine, right? Like, it's just like flashing things everywhere, blah, blah, blah. But it's like getting mad traffic because it's so ugly. Like, you look at Craigslist and how defensible that has been. Certainly they've improved some of the experience, but it is a pretty rudimentary experience. Yeah. I mean, it's quite frustrating to use it sometimes, yet it's still doing great, right? So it's very hard to predict what is successful or not. And I do feel, particularly at the 0 to 1 phase and at the early stage building phase, you have to have some conviction around something. You bank on the people, but there is also a little bit of luck.
Yeah, that's so interesting. You're sort of describing like a usefulness by popularity, like that something is, we talk a lot on the show about like what makes a useful product. Would you say that your stance is like, well, if people like it, then it's useful?
Ultimately is trying to judge, like, they have all these fancy metrics, DAU over MAU, if you're trying to be quantitative about it, daily active users over monthly active users. They have things like net promoter score. Like, there's that famous Sean Ellis survey where you kind of measure the delta between the 9s and 10s versus the sub 6 results. And like, if that's greater than 40%, that means you've achieved some form of NPS. You could have all of that, right? You have sentiment scores on your reviews and whatnot. I like to look at happiness. It's just like, are your users happy? Are they delighted? Like, are they raving? Do they love it? Right. But, at the same time, and a term I like to use this, is called the arbitrage window. It's just shrinking. Like, the speed of building is so crazy now that you could be in that position or situation, and then within minutes, within hours. It's like passing fad and they're on to the next thing, right? Like aura farming was like super hot as a TikTok cultural trend for like a week, with those boat dancers, and then like it just disappeared, right? Like, and so, but in that moment, if you can ride those trains and pivot quickly, it's a way to massively drive growth. And then from there, can you then leverage that to re-engage your audience and go further?
Yeah, one of the things you and I talked about too in this vein of like what makes something useful is we talked about sort of like AI slop and bots and sort of this automated aspect of what's going on the internet. I'm curious what your take is. I like your, like, I feel very torn, right? Because I like your stance that you're like, well, the people decide what's useful, right? Like the masses decide. And at the risk of feeling like the morality police, because I do agree with that. Like, who am I to decide what's useful? But I also like, I especially just to the events of the last couple of weeks, I keep thinking about like 1984's Prol feed, where it's like, it's basically machine generated content designed to be either salacious or sentimental to just like keep the masses complacent while authoritarianism is going on, which obviously we can all understand why I'm thinking of that now. But I'm just curious your stance. Like I saw this, I saw somebody make a joke about like AI interviewers and how like at some point the candidates will have AI agents, and like when does it become an AI interviewer talking to an AI agent and like nobody's actually in the meeting, it's just representative. So I'm curious what your thoughts are in terms of like AI content in this metric of are people happy using it, and how would we know that based off of AI generated content on the internet?
So, I think I have a couple different anecdotes here. So one, Google had come out with some write-ups, this is like 6 months, 12 months ago, talking about SEO, and they basically all but implied that they would penalize slop. So slop being defined as AI generated content, which makes sense. It's like, it's not human authored. It should rank lower. Then they revised that, I think in February, earlier this year, February, March, where they basically said, it's not that whether it's AI generated or not, it's just whether it's low value. So then naturally the question is, what's the definition of low value? And their sort of argument was there are plenty of SEO marketers who are using human content farms to write articles as well. And arguably that content or those articles are pretty low value, right? And so it's interesting to think that AI can actually write high quality content. And the fact that we're consuming so much through ChatGPT, let's assume, let's take aside the fact that it can be wrong, but let's assume that it's 95% of the time correct. It tends to read fine, right? It reads like a well-written article, right? And we're consuming that. So, part of me on one hand thinks like, okay, yes, there's a lot of slop on the internet. And that's why, of course, I call this era Web 3, because everybody's moving to a closed internet. This is the opposite of Web 2, was open internet. And this trend started well before Gen AI. Like if you just looked at the Facebooks and the LinkedIns and the sort of, the superscalers, whatnot, they were clamping down on all of their APIs, like, 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. Like it was virtually impossible to build on LinkedIn, build on Facebook, build on Instagram, because they don't want you to build competing products. They don't want you to build on their graphs, right? They don't want you to build on their data. So this trend already started. And then what's really happened is with Gen AI, it's basically massively accelerated. Now even the content and media publications themselves are putting up guardrails and walls because they don't want their content just to be, consumed by LLMs. So we're now entering this sort of closed internet. There's certainly a lot of AI slop out there. I think the question is, one, are the readers of this content, do they feel like they're consuming garbage? Two, are the systems designed in such a way that they can find the content that they want, irrespective of whether it's AI generated or not, right? And I think those are two orthogonal questions. Because if the systems are designed in such a way, like I'm on Reddit and I'm reading, let's say, a comment forum, and it's high value and interesting, I actually don't care if it was an AI response, bot response, or a human response, right? But if I'm not able to find that sort of high value content, and I'm just reading a lot of low quality responses, you see that, for example, on most short form social networks, particularly Twitter, you'll see tons of low value replies, right? That's frustrating. And so you hope that the algorithm can figure out how to surface and elevate higher value content. I think it's interesting as a side note, when you think about SEO, the ranking on Google is very much based on high authority domains and backlinks from those sources. So if you have a link from CNN or Forbes or whatnot, Business Insider, those are high authority domains. But to be ranked on GEO or AEO, so answer engine optimization, so like an AI chat, it's not based on high authority domains. It's based on high authority UGC, which is quite different, right? You'll see the most cited backlinks from ChatGPT be things like Reddit, be things like Wikipedia, Trustpilot. Why? These are sources that are most likely to have human authored content. So it's quite interesting that the content that the LLM is displaying to the end user, it wants to aggregate from content that it believes is most likely to be human authored versus other AI generated content. But it's interesting from an SEO perspective, it's not differentiated.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about that, of the sort of like the AI loop, right? Of just like, is AI looking at other AI for its answers? And I think it's really interesting that, I mean, I understand why, like, you know, generative AI engines would look at UGC, user generated content. But I also think it's interesting. It speaks to this broader pattern that we're seeing of like companies that use AI, but don't want like candidates applying with AI generated applications, or don't want people who don't want their employees like using AI generated text on their like presentations. And I'm big in the book world, and we talk a lot about how a lot of times the same people who are using AI generated covers or AI generated aspects to their book will then say at the end of an audiobook, like, you can't use any part of this to train AI engines. And it's like, where like, it's so interesting to me that I feel like there's this dichotomy of like, do we trust it or not? You know, and you're saying basically if the content is good, we should trust it, which I'm inclined to agree with. But it is interesting of like why, if the internet is becoming even more AI, why do we keep trusting human generated content as like the ultimate content that's true and valid?
I'm on that boat. And so right now, the best sort of practice is very much to label like this content was AI assisted. And you kind of see that. I think even when you're reading like CNN, it'll sometimes have a little footer or footnote. Now, that's not the case everywhere, right? And you could argue that we hit a point where what's the point of even mentioning that, right? Like everything, of course, is AI assisted at some level. And I would counter argue, if you're not using AI, you're probably at a disadvantage. I think the other thing that's worth calling out, because you're talking about application process for jobs, you're talking about AI representing you in a first screening interview, etc. There's a lot of interesting cultural data points that are happening that I don't necessarily want to challenge. We also have data points showing that some interviewers or interviewees prefer AI in the first interview. Why? Because the first interview is usually the sort of pre-interview screen, and arguably is the least objective interview in the interview process, because it's sort of like, oh, are you a cultural fit type interview before they kind of move you into the real interview. And so we've heard data like this, like, hey, if we could have AI run the first interview screen, then at least it could be a little bit more objective about cultural fit. We've seen data points, and we actually saw this, I think, in one country now, I forget. They've brought an AI judge as part of the jury, right?
Oh
so
God.
The jury will have humans and it'll have one AI, right? And it's interesting to think about an AI thought partner on every sort of activity as just a data point, right? Don't think of AI as like, here's your answer. But in some ways, what is Gen AI really good at? It's really good at preparing you to ask the right questions. And just being able to ask the right question is a massive sort of unlock. So, I think what's ultimately going to happen, and we're doing this already in at least my group within Mozilla, is the interview process is actually changing. AI has become this massive, like, creative unlocking all this human potential. They have all these great ideas and they now want to build, and they couldn't build it before, and they can describe what they want, which is really amazing, right? So all this unleashed creativity. During the interview, we're not going through your resume anymore. You're building with us together, right?
Yeah.
We're vibing. We're using some sort of vibe tool, and we're building something, and we're designing collaboratively, and we're getting a sense of how you think about the problem and how you approach the problem. Because ultimately, in some ways, we're all becoming conductors and orchestrators, and the executioners are little AI agents that are running around.
But how does the AI representative, how does that not then become the de facto expert in a situation and then erode trust? I feel like as the more and more we insert AI into the process, the less we trust our own initial instincts and each other.
Yeah, so I think there's a subtle clarification here. I think in these examples that I'm providing, AI is being provided as an option.
Yeah.
It's not being provided as the only choice, right? And so it's really for the buyer in that case to decide, or the interviewee to decide, what do they prefer, right? And what I'm saying from a cultural perspective is we're seeing Look at the rise of Waymo, overtaking Lyft rides in San Francisco, and character AI, people having full-blown conversations with virtual representations of their deceased parents or, loved ones or friends or whatever. And again, independent whether you're judging whether this is a good or bad thing for humankind, but we're seeing a lot of sort of like adoption and comfort around this. There's a reason the acronym HITL has become really popular over the last 6 months, which is human in the loop, because humans are part of the loop and they're not using AI to fully sort of replace. When AI is completely doing the full automation, that's where I think some of these issues start really emerging around it becoming sloppy. But even in the case of the AI sales rep, there's a transition point to where maybe they want to build a relationship with a human, but they want to get their first pass questions answered through AI.
Yeah. We talked about this in one of our previous episodes of sort of like, there's something to be said for like being transparent about like, this is an AI sales agent that like, yeah, like you said, being able to give people choice. And there is something like, I think that some of the evidence that's saying people prefer talking to a chatbot, particularly in like sales conversations, like the value of a Waymo is that you don't have to interact with a driver who might be weird. You know what I mean? Like we've all had that weird guy who's trying to like pitch you something or get your number or whatever. And so it's nice to like eliminate that risk. And I think as problematic as, yeah, it might be in the long run, there is something appealing sometimes about like, I don't want to have to interact with a person or like think about their feelings or have the extra energy of having to be social at this moment. And so,
and you know, what's funny about that comment is that was almost outside the Overton window. People didn't really want to say that the reason Waymo was taking off was because, frankly, a lot of people don't want to talk to people, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think it's interesting. Now it's, become totally normal to say that, but, I think, I'm glad you kind of called that out because this is the question, like, is that good for society? That's a different question.
Right.
I think that's more of a philosophical question, but certainly, sticking with where I started, let the world decide. It's definitely people are preferring it.
Yeah. One of the things too that you and I have talked about, and I think is relevant to this conversation about sort of like where is the algorithmic internet taking us, is this discovery challenge. You talked about, it's never been easier in history. This is the easiest we've had it to be able to build stuff yourself, which I think is very cool. Obviously, there's like, again, I think it's interesting, this conversation. We're following your lead of I don't know anything, I'm just observing, and taking a non-judgmental stance of sort of the internet. And so it's like, yeah, whether vibe coding works or not, like it definitely is the most democratic we've ever been in terms of who can build software tools. But as you've pointed out before in conversations, the problem is then, well, what do you do with it? If then discovery is completely controlled by Google, by LLMs, by social media, and that's like kind of it, all these algorithms that have so much information to take in, likely have undisclosed interests. We know that a lot of these companies are taking partnerships, and like we know like Reddit gets prioritized in Google results, right? And so how do you think about sort of how do we move into an era where discovery is also democratized?
The T app, I'm sure you're familiar with that.
Yes, we've talked about the T app on this.
Yeah, it's podcast. Amazing. It kind of came out of nowhere. It's been around for a year, but it kind of came out, or 2 years, but it came out of nowhere and then suddenly took off, right? It hit this sort of inflection point and just took off. And I don't think of it as like it's somehow being popularized on TikTok or on social or in the news. It took off because of just massive word of mouth. Right? People sharing virally. And so that's a great example of what I would describe as product-led growth, right? It was a product that had implicit viral hooks. It created a sense of FOMO. And so it like had a natural growth loop.
So it's interesting you used it as an example because it's not totally true. So what the T app did to become viral is that they actually falsely claimed that they were created by the woman who created the Are We Dating the Same Guy Facebook group.
Oh, interesting.
And there's a long trail of them falsely saying that that woman was associated with them, where she was actually the one who built the organic following. And the product that the people actually wanted was the Facebook group. And then T piggybacked on that and essentially told everybody that they were that. So it's really interesting that that's the example, because that is like an unethical way to sort of piggyback on the virality of how to get discovered, is to use something that already exists, right?
Yeah, this is a conundrum, because I would argue, what are examples of consumer apps that didn't grow without playing on the edge. So if you look at like different eras, like you look at Zynga, they basically spammed the Facebook wall, right? At that time, that was the growth channel. They played on the edge. If you look at Uber, they basically broke laws to play on the edge, right? Snapchat, I think Snapchat was like harvesting all your address book and all your Facebook contacts, right? Isn't that what they were doing? Or was that Instagram? One of them. But this is when the APIs were opening and they were kind of working through it. And I remember even LinkedIn at some point might have even been updating your address book contact information with LinkedIn URLs. Yeah. Right. So every app at some point, particularly in consumer, is playing in a gray area, right? And they obviously hit a certain point where they can't do that anymore and they have to play by the rules. But growth is so hard. How do we think about this? I don't know, right? I sort of would, I guess my thought experiment here is what's the counter example?
What about like a Duolingo? They just had really, like, they spammed you personally, but I feel like they didn't do anything on the edge.
I don't know enough about Duolingo's history to be able to comment, but I would argue that I would be skeptical that they did not play on some gray area. For sure, Duolingo plays on a lot of human psychology. Yeah. All right. They have a lot of gamification in their app. Right. Now, is that a bad design pattern or not? I don't know. Consumer growth hackers are studying design patterns all day, and they're looking for edges and they're looking for areas where they can exploit. Like right now, super hot topic is programmatic TikTok, right? Publishing dozens of short form videos across multiple accounts to see if you can go viral. So I don't know. But building a brand is so hard. We certainly can't rely on traditional means. If you're talking about App Store and Google, like, you're just dead in the water. Like, you need to come up with something out of box.
Yeah, this is interesting. Okay, so like this podcast is about enshittification. We have a definition of enshittification from Cory Doctorow, essentially that platforms are honest in the beginning and they're good to their users and they prioritize user experience. And then as they grow, they start to lose that sort of sense of responsibility towards the users and start to play in shadier spaces. They get shadier partners. They start to put up the subscription price. I'm curious because I feel like I heard in you saying that like everybody, like in order to grow, in order to hack the growth, you have to play in this like gray area. To me, that sounds like what you're saying is like there's no way to grow without enshittifying. Is that true?
So in consumer, it's impossible for me to say there's no way.
Right.
For sure. Right. There's no way I could say that's a hyperbole. Like, it's impossible. However, I would say if you take case studies of the most popular, let's call them unicorn consumer startups, right? Most of the unicorns are SaaS startups. So let's ignore enterprise, where that's a very different playbook. That's targeted spam, targeted cold email outreach, webinars, whatever. Consumer. It's, I would argue if you talk to the first PMs on each of those companies, or the founder, there is definitely some gray areas, right? I will give an example of one of my own products. Two of my own products, right? So in 2008-9, I had a recipe app that went super viral, 30 million installs, Android. That's incredible at that time frame, right? 2009, 2010 time frame. Is this gray or not? We did two things. We figured out that the App Store loved to feature food apps. Why? Because on holidays. Why? Because people love to cook on holidays. So is it gray or not that I went on Craigslist, put up an ad, and purchased recipes for every holiday in the world? Went to the App Store and said, "Hey, we have recipes to feature in Laos today, and it's a holiday there. Can you feature us there?" So I was featured every day of the year somewhere in the world, and so I was able to drive 30 million installs. Now, you could argue that's a clever growth hack. I wasn't necessarily enshittifying. I would argue that many of these recipes, we never cooked them. Yeah. I didn't test them. I don't know if they were any good. Right. But
prioritizing the distribution over the product, basically, or over the user experience.
Yeah. Right. And so, how do you judge that? I don't know. But on the flip side, we became the biggest recipe community on Android at that time. And then the community improved it, right? The community got involved and they made things better, and they made it, and that's, you rely on the masses. But at the time, that was our clever way of driving growth.
Yeah. I'm interested, like, are there models of discovery or, growth driving that you feel different, whether they work or not? Like, are you as you look at the tech landscape right now, are there pathways that you're like, oh, that seems different or radical or hopeful in a way that it differs from sort of like the challenges, the bottlenecks we see with Google, with LLMs, with social, traditional social media? Are there any pathways you see that feel different?
I don't know if they feel different. I would argue the tactics that I'm seeing working right now are not good, are not healthy for the internet.
Right.
So for example, we know LLMs love high authority UGC, and being recommended through an LLM is increasingly becoming one of the largest sources of growth for many companies. So for example, if you're in a vibe coding tool, like you're in ChatGPT, and you're like, hey, I need to set up a blog, what it suggests is worth a lot. That's like a super high intent referral, right?
Yeah.
Much greater than Google search on its own. And so the question is, how do you become the app that's referred? Well, I need to be cited. How do I create a backlink to be cited? Well, I need to effectively flood comments into high authority UGC sites. So what do? You start using tools that monitor Reddit, monitor affiliate sites. You start doing lots of podcasts. Interestingly, podcast transcripts are actually considered high authority UGC for LLMs because podcasts are usually human created, right? You start doing these sorts of things to create more backlinks to get more referral traffic through GEO, right? So that's just one example. A different example, which again, very clearly I wouldn't describe as healthy, and I did speak to a PM at TikTok about this, and it was interesting hearing their perspective, is you basically flood the zone on short form video social, right? So you publish lots of YouTube shorts, you publish lots of TikTok content. It's not about the quality of the content. It's about the frequency. It's about the number of accounts. And you bank or hope that eventually the algorithm will surface something wide, which will then create more followers. And then it's like kind of rinse and repeat, and I remember speaking to the TikTok PM. I'm like, how do you optimize for this? Some chunk of your content is AI generated. And he had said something interesting. He had said that originally they were trying to identify when it was AI created. They still actually have a label if it's truly AI created, but increasingly they now target a percentage of the feed to be AI created, right? So it's almost like they actually want it to be part of the experience because some people love it or are consuming it. So I don't know how all this plays out. And I would argue this isn't necessarily helpful. Like creating like 5 billion articles on like how to update your Gmail password from every popular news site as a how-to guide is not particularly useful. That question has been answered 4,000 times over, right? And so, how do we solve this? I don't know. But in some ways, I've always been of the perspective, you have to play within the rules that are given. And obviously there's separate efforts, and we do a lot of that within Mozilla and the foundation to improve the internet, right? And to make it a more healthy space by creating more guardrails and creating more rules. But that's a different effort, right? That's lobbying, that's politics and whatnot. But as a single person, it's very hard to elicit that kind of change, right? As for what it's worth, like I see people trying to drive change in their local communities through city council and school boards and whatnot, and they have very little success. And then next thing, they just donate money and they have a lot more success. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, fascinating, right? So somebody said something interesting to me once from the perspective of Mozilla, the greatest way to make change is just to make a lot of money. Because if you make a lot of money, you can create more influence.
Yeah, that's like an effective altruism pitch, essentially. Yeah, that's so interesting. Yeah, we talk about, that's kind of what the show is about, right? Because we know that like the pushback to enshittification is competition, regulation, labor power, and self-help. Self-help being like you're allowed to make third-party fixes to proprietary tools, whatever. You can make your own tools. But all of those, to your point, are policy level changes. Those are not individual changes. Those are ecosystem changes. And part of why we started this show is that we were like, well, that's not going to be happening considering what's going on outside at the moment. So what do we do in the meantime as people who work in tech and who use tech and who want to experience like a better tech ecosystem? What can we do? And it's interesting. I think you're coming from a perspective that's very different than AJ's and mine, but it is kind of like I think it's admirable that you're like, I don't know, man. Like it's hard to do it. Like that's kind of why we're talking about this all the time, is that we don't know. We don't know what the right way is to try to like at least carve out a better internet for yourself. Or if you build something useful, how do you get it to be used without going into these gray areas, without falling victim? I mean, we had a whole conversation as a team of just like, do we have a TikTok, right? I'm not on TikTok personally, but we were like, how are we going to grow the show if we don't have a TikTok? And so we have to deal with these challenges all the time.
With the amount of signal noise from LLMs and just the amount of stuff being vibe coded and created, it's very hard to get attention.
Yeah.
It was very eye-opening to me when Netflix, I think Reed Hastings said at some point, like maybe over a decade ago, that they thought the Xbox was their competitor. And I had never thought about it in that frame, but really what he meant was there's a finite number of hours or minutes in the day where I'm doing entertainment, consuming, mind dumb, whatever you want to call it, sort of things. And we're competing for that attention. The trick often seems to be using tactics to kind of get there, and then, of course, changing tactics once you're there. I agree. This is not ideal, right? Like this is like, it would be great if you could build something and it was a healthy product for the internet and it could just get distribution. I'll give you a funny example. Food logging. I don't know if people played with the food logging category. These apps have very specific design patterns. You install MyFitnessPal, you go through 5-10 different screens during onboarding, and then they slap a paywall. And the question is why they take you through so much friction and then slap a paywall. The reason is they know.
It's
right?
sunk cost fallacy,
yeah, exactly. And they know your motivation is highest on that day because the churn is super high. Most people can't log their food after a week or two, right? They give up, right? But that day, you're going to go and buy that watch and you're going to go pay for the 1-year subscription for that app and you're going to go buy that sleep tracker and all that stuff. And 3 weeks later, for 95% of people, it's going to end up in a drawer. And they know this, right? And so they've designed the entire UX pattern around this. And so to come out with an app that, let's say, doesn't do that, how do you win?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we don't know. That's what we're trying to figure out.
I don't know. I'm listening to the pod too, right? To figure this out.
Well, before we go Falcon Mode, Raj, where can people find you? What do you want people to know about you? How can they get in touch with you on the internet?
The fastest growing occupation in the US is the freelancer. It's the side hustle. It's the, ownership economy, be your own boss. And so we have a number of products we're building at Mozilla, for that audience, the solopreneur, because we believe we should democratize access to building businesses. People, if you want, you should have ownership around your time. You shouldn't be forced into a 996 kind of work environment or whatever it might be, right?
We haven't even talked about that on this show yet.
And so, one of the apps that we've launched is called Solo. It's a website builder for small business. We have other apps in that category we're building as well. So I definitely want to shout that out. And if they want to reach me, maybe not the most desirable, but I am on all of the natural and shitification platforms, X, Threads, LinkedIn, you name it.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, for those of you who don't know what 996 is, it refers to an imported strategy from China that Silicon Valley is adopting to work 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. So it means from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week, which is gross. Well, cool. Well, should we go Falcon Mode?
Let's do it. Raj, can you give us your best Falcon impression?
Falcon impression. Oh, I'm not prepared for this. This is like a bird,
yeah, like a bird. We do this to everybody, and nobody's prepared. So
like the sound of a falcon.
Yeah, the sound. Yeah, what do you think a falcon sounds like?
I don't know. That's probably just adorable.
That's it.
We love
That's
it.
a clip. We got it. Yeah, Falcon Mode, we basically take a listener idea and figure out how to make it useful.
Awesome.
Raj, feel free to chime in. We'd love your thoughts on this. But this week is coming from Allison. So Allison says, I work remotely and love working at coffee shops and parks. But a lot of the time when I find a new location that seems promising, it's super crowded or is hosting an event or has a no laptop policy. It would be so useful to have an app that lets people say whether or not the current conditions of a place are appropriate for working. So interestingly, my friend Abhinav actually started this exact app.
Yes.
He called it Coffee Pass. And I just saw this before we went on, and I just saw that their domain has shut down. So I need to talk to Abhinav about why this shut down. But him and my friend Max were working on this for a few years. And basically the idea they're both Max is a software developer. Abhinav was working in tech. They're trying to find good coffee shops, but they had this really cool like bean loyalty system. So you would like go and check in, you get a certain amount of beans, and then it was user reported. So they'd be like, oh, this is good. This has good Wi-Fi, good outlets. This has good coffee. This is good for these type of things. And they were like slowly onboarding different coffee shops to get on board. But
yeah, I think the user reported part is kind of key to like an app like this working, because the point of Allison's comment is like, even a coffee shop that is good to work at sometimes may not be good to work at on Thursday afternoons when they have like open mic guitar or whatever. But it's interesting that your friend, we talk about in this segment, we talk about making, like, we try to figure out if the idea is useful, fundable, and feasible. I think maybe this idea is not the most fundable. I think if you were going to build this yourself, like Yelp does have a lot of these filters, but I think like my experience with using Yelp for this purpose is that they're not the most reliable. So like a lot of places have like a no laptop policy. I don't think that there's like a filter for that on Yelp. I would say if you're building it yourself, you should definitely use an API like Yelp, or like you don't need to be entering in profiles from scratch, because really what this value is the overlay of information specific to, can I work here? Is it comfortable to work here? And like, can I work here right now? Yeah, Googling, I tried to Google to be like, does this, we always try with this segment to be like, is this something that already exists so that you don't have to build it? And definitely Googling it, you get a lot of like co-working space rentals, which I think is not the same pitch, right? This is like, I'm just trying to go somewhere for a couple hours.
the one thing I will say, it's worse going back to the 996 thing. There's nothing that ruins the vibe more than like you're just trying to be tech free and in a coffee shop or somewhere in like a nice third space, and then all of a sudden somebody whips out a laptop and
Absolutely.
you're like, and the guy with the monitors that is in the coffee shop. So I do wish, I actually kind of disagree with you, Ariel. I think co-working spots are really the antidote to this. There aren't enough WeWorks, I think, really.
Yeah.
There aren't enough. And I actually just was in a place in LA called Neuhaus that just shut down.
Neuhaus shut down?
Yeah, it shut down.
Oh,
they like emailed the night before being like, effective tomorrow, everything is shut down. And now I'm getting all these like Neuhaus spelled Haus and all these other ads on my feed. Hopefully somebody does bring it back, because I do think, especially if it was more of like a Soho house without being douchey, but if they were around the world, if you're traveling, WeWork had something great going on. I think now just unfortunately the brand has tanked.
Yeah.
But I wish there were more solutions where it was like properly for working, and then our coffee third space hangout places could be properly for hanging out.
Yeah, I mean, I
but
do
unfortunately they're all kind of like merged now.
yeah, I do think no laptop policies are like totally fair and valid.
Raj, what are your thoughts on this as a business idea?
I think the hard part is the getting live data, getting heuristics around does the coffee shop have good Wi-Fi, things like that. You can imagine the reviews within their Yelp pages or their Google place listings have that kind of information, and search is getting better, and so you should be able to figure that out. But what you don't know is, where can I go right now and actually get a desk, particularly for high density. So if you're in like urban dwellings, like cities, New York, San Francisco, etc., where the real estate, Red Rock and Mountain View, which is close to me, they get eaten up pretty fast. And I don't know how to get that live data in an easy way, but I suspect if somebody could crack that, it might change the value. And I imagine you could put an API around it, and then people could then integrate it into Google Maps, or it just becomes another data feed for one of the existing. So I think it could have potential if you can crack that. But it reminded me a lot of, and I'm sure at some point you've seen apps like this, like where's the hot party? Like what club to go to tonight? Like when I was in my 20s living in New York, that was like a thing. Like, where do you go tonight? Like, where's the hot bar? And there was all these apps trying to crowdsource it, and it didn't work. It was just too hard, right? Because what they also realized was, what's the definition of hot? Like,
right.
It depends. Is it people? Is it music? Is it the venue? etc.
One thing, actually, too, when I was applying to my current job, they had us pick a product and design a feature. I picked the product Surfline. Are you guys familiar with Surfline?
Mm-mm.
It's an app for surfers, and basically you can look and see what's the wave swell like today, wave height, and they rate it. They're like, oh, it's 2 to 3, it's fair, and for surf spots all over the world. The feature I requested was a crowdedness feature because I was like, it's cool if the waves are good, but then that means everyone's going to go there. And so I want to know how crowded it is. But I also then discussed this paradox of like them inventing, like Surfline inventing this app, and the crowdedness feature also then creates the problem of crowds. And similar to this is like, you might be a local in a neighborhood and you're like, this is the sickest place to work. As soon as that comes online and now other people see that it's available and a sick place to work, it's no longer going to be that. So I think locals would be really incentivized to not use this, whereas visitors would be incentivized to use it. So I think it would create this tension between locals and, the digital wandering nomads that are coming in and invading.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like myself.
But relatable problem to want to get out of your house sometimes. Well, listeners, we want to hear from you. Send us your product ideas or your problems that might be solvable with tech. You can DM us at actuallyusefulpod on most social media platforms, or you can email us at heyactuallyuseful@gmail.com. And that's our show today. Raj, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing all your perspectives and some internet history with us. We really appreciate it.
For sure. Thank you so much. Enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you so much, Raj.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Actually Useful is part of the Industry Plant Podcast Network. It's co-hosted by Ariel Butters and AJ Weaver. It's executive produced and edited by Josh Stratton Carlson. If you like the show, please consider subscribing to our Substack or YouTube at Actually Useful Pod, or give us a follow on most social media platforms.